On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbour?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was. When he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do thou likewise." This is the word of the Lord.
Well, it's a great privilege to be with you this morning. Thank you for inviting me to come and speak on behalf of Christian Solidarity Worldwide. And we're soon going to see something up on the screen. Yeah, good. First of all, I want to ask you a question. If say, your foot hurts you, what do you do? Sorry? I didn't hear that. Say ouch. Yeah. Anything else? Maureen. Grin and bear it. That's very stoical. Maureen's a very stoical person, obviously. Go and find out if there's something wrong with it, yeah. Go to the doctor. You take action, don't you? If your foot is hurting you, you take action. What if a member of your family is suffering? What do you do then? Take them to the doctors or go and see them. You take action. Now, we're in a worldwide body. We've just been reminded of that this morning when Stuart got baptized. We're in a worldwide body. It exists all over the world. And someone was talking about 2.1 billion Christians in the world. Now it's 2.1 billion plus 1, which is good. Now, the Good Samaritan gives us a lead as to what to do. In fact, I'm going to move that out of the way, I think. Don't need that. The Good Samaritan gives us a lead as to what to do, because in the worldwide body, many members are hurting. In our worldwide family, many members are being persecuted, and the Good Samaritan gives us a lead as to what to do. He didn't say, "It's nothing to do with me," did he? The priest and the Levite, they said, "Nothing to do with me, Gov," and they passed by on the other side. The Good Samaritan saw the man. He'd never met him before, but his common humanity linked him to the man on the ground. He couldn't just walk by. He had to do something. Now, the man on the ground to the Good Samaritan was a total stranger. Our fellow Christians throughout the world are actually our own flesh and blood. That's worth thinking about, isn't it? Christians throughout the world, they're our own flesh and blood because they're part of the body that we belong to, even though we don't know them personally. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3, the writer says, "Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners." How about that? as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are ill-treated as if you yourselves were suffering. Now, I guess in the 19th century, we could have got away with a lot of ignorance about what's going on throughout the world because we probably wouldn't have been able to know. But nowadays, with all the modern media there are, the world is on our doorstep. There's no excuse for us not to know what's going on in the world. Now, I'm very scared of technology, but I'm going to try something revolutionary here. I think you're going to have to stick with it, my friend. And that's the context in which I want to speak to you about the work of Christian Solidarity Worldwide. I'm going to take you on a journey to look at the issue of religious freedom, what Christian Solidarity Worldwide are doing about it, and how you can get involved. Christian Solidarity Worldwide, a voice for the voiceless, those who can't speak for themselves. Could we have the next slide, please? Christian Solidarity Worldwide was established some 35 years ago, and it works for religious freedom through advocacy. Now, we all know what advocacy is, don't we? It's a bit of a middle-class word, I guess. But an advocate is someone who speaks on behalf of somebody else, isn't he? A lawyer. And Christian Solidarity Worldwide speaks for those who can't speak for themselves. The reality is that in many countries, the right to religious freedom is consistently violated. And Christian Solidarity Worldwide is not looking for compassion in those countries and the authorities. It's looking for justice. It's looking for human rights to be respected. Next slide, please. Yeah, the reality in 60 countries. Let me just allow you to read some of those words. How do you feel about that list of words? Any reaction from anybody? Someone give me a reaction to those words. Anger, that's good. I'm going to talk about anger later on. But there's a right place for anger. Jesus was rightly angry on some occasions. And we can be rightly angry about some of those. That list of ugly things. Let me just mention marginalization. What does that mean? It means you're pushed to the margins of society. If you're a Christian, you might not have any access to education. So the best sort of job you could think of in life is just some kind of menial job because you're not allowed education. Imprisonment. I shudder to tell you about the situation of many Christians in a country called Eritrea. It's in Eastern Africa, near to Ethiopia. If you're found guilty of the crime of being a Christian, you may end up imprisoned in a metal container where during the day the temperature can soar to 50 degrees centigrade and can go down at night to 0 degrees or less. That is truly, friends, that is hell on earth, isn't it? That is absolutely unimaginable. The worst one of those, I suppose, is the last one, death. The worst country in the world for Christians is North Korea, where the regime controls everything and everybody. You are not allowed to step out of line. You're not allowed to think for yourself. You're not allowed to have your own belief. You have to follow what Kim Jong-un says. There are prison camps in North Korea that Christians get sent to. There are regular executions of dissidents as well. I think they happen on Saturdays, and if you want to show you're loyal to the regime, you have to turn out and watch people being executed. I tell you, it's a very, very dark country, and CSW wants to do something about that and is doing something about it. An American think tank says that 75% of the world's population lives in countries where there are restrictions on religious freedom. And Christian Solidarity Worldwide works in over 20 countries where being a Christian can lead to harassment, torture, or death. In Indonesia, churches are being forcibly closed down. In Cuba, pastors are in prison. In Nigeria, Christians have to flee their villages. So going on to slide 5. What does Christian Solidarity Worldwide do about this? The mandate is based on Proverbs 31 verse 8. Speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. And Christian Solidarity Worldwide does, I'll call it CSW from now on if that's okay with you, does a number of things. Firstly, research, finding out the facts. What actually is going on? And then analysis. What do the facts say? How widespread is the abuse? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? What's going on? Thirdly, exposure. Laying out the facts for all to see so that tyrants can't just hide, but bringing it to the attention of the world. And then advocacy, speaking out in the places that matter politically, because these are political issues in the EU, at the UN, to the United Kingdom government, to the US government. A lot of the key to this advocacy is exerting pressure. We live in an interconnected world, and it's hard for governments to ignore the pressure coming from the international community. And then training locals to speak out for themselves, church leaders, community leaders, human rights activists. And finally, solidarity. The picture there is of a man called David in India. I like the intimacy of the setting, don't you? There he is in India, talking to local Christians. He's the advocacy officer for India. Just imagine you're under persecution and a man like David comes to visit you. How would you feel? I think you'd feel blessed. You'd feel someone is taking notice of us. Someone is concerned about us. And just recently, a man called Ben Rogers, also from CSW, went to Indonesia to see an atheist in prison. An atheist in prison. Christian Solidarity Worldwide is not just working for Christians, but working for proper human rights for everybody, regardless of their religion, and even if they have no religion at all. If we could go on to the next slide. Thank you very much. This man is called Stuart Windsor, and he's testifying at a United Nations Commission of Inquiry into human rights abuses in North Korea. In 2007, CSW made a strong case for a UN inquiry. It was eventually set up, and CSW was invited to give testimony from the facts that they've gathered inside North Korea. Now, getting information out of North Korea is not that easy. And when I was at CSW recently, I said to the lady I was talking to, what are your sources of information? She said, we have inside sources. She couldn't really tell me any more than that because it has to be completely, totally, and absolutely confidential. But there are sources there inside the country as well as people who've managed to escape from that country. The inquiry has reported back in February this year, and the United Nations Human Rights Council has asked the UN Security Council to take some action over North Korea. And CSW will press for this to happen, and in fact for North Korea to be referred to the International Criminal Court. In the report published in February this year, it said that North Korea is a state that does not have any parallel in the present world. It is just a very, very dark place. So CSW helps to awaken the conscience of the world to what's going on. It also, could I have the next slide, please? It also brings delegations from countries where there are human rights abuses to the UK to talk directly to the government in the UK. For example, the Foreign Office. Recently, CSW published a landmark report on what's happening in Indonesia and brought over an Indonesian delegation to the UK Parliament and to Brussels to give a first-hand account of what's going on. So that is exposure. It's getting the locals over here to talk about the situation. Could we just go on to the next one? Thank you. CSW doesn't just do advocacy, it also campaigns for religious freedom. And you may be wondering, what is Operation 18? Well, last year, CSW launched Operation 18 based on Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to underscore the plight of millions who don't enjoy the freedom of belief that we do. And if we go on to the next, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, the freedom to change their religion or belief, and the freedom to manifest their religion or belief. If we go on to the next one. A large number of people signed up to the Operation 18 postcards, and this picture is of a sample being handed over to a lady called Sue Breeze from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And there's an ongoing dialogue with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and particular with Baroness Varsi, who's the Minister for Faith and Communities. So CSW is talking to people in government circles. If we go on to the next slide. Why is religious freedom so much abused in so many countries? What's the root cause of so much hatred and animosity? Well, one factor is when religious hatred is expressed through the education system, through preachers, through the media, this often results in violent actions towards Christians and other religious minorities. And if we could go on to the next slide, we'll look at a vicious circle. Now, you probably can't stand on your head, so you might not be able to work out all of this, but I will just talk you through it. It starts off with expression of religious hatred, maybe in a mosque, maybe in school. It leads to a culture of religious hatred, where religious hatred is the norm. It's what we do. It's where we are. Thirdly, mass mobilization against vulnerable communities. Mob violence, in other words. And fourthly, actual violence towards minority communities. And even worse than that is that the culprits go unpunished and victims are often criminalized. And with your help, CSW wants to break that cycle, this vicious cycle of hatred that achieves destruction. If we go on to the next picture, this is a picture from a place called Kandhamal in India. In 2008, a mob of Hindu fanatics attacked a Christian community. 90 people were killed and 54,000 people were displaced. Now this lady, Asmita Digal, lost her husband and his body was never found. So she can't claim a widow's pension, leaving her in extreme poverty as well as the anguish of losing her husband. But there's more than that. CSW's research shows that there were warnings several decades before that this kind of thing would happen if preventative action wasn't taken. And so that vicious circle that we saw in the previous slide, it actually works. It's actually there in the world and it needs to be stopped. And if we go on to the next slide, we see the gutted remains of the church in Kandhamal. Sir, earlier on you talked about being angry. Are you angry? Oh, it was, who was it? Who was angry? Yeah. You are? Okay. Is anybody else angry? Put up your hand if you're angry about what's going on. Yep, quite a few people are angry. Good. We need to be angry. Dear old Nigel Farage, no, I'm not sure he is dear or old, but Nigel Farage talked about mobilizing a people's army didn't he? And I think we need to mobilize an army of anger, an army of people who say, this is not good enough. We cannot put up with this any longer. We can't see our brethren throughout the world persecuted in this way and denied their human rights. Anger can sometimes be a good thing. If we go on to the next slide. Yeah. In Lahore, Pakistan, a large mob attacked a Christian community called the Joseph Colony. And that was all stirred up by hate speech from a local imam who accused Christians of blasphemy. Churches were destroyed and hundreds had to flee for their lives. And no one has been held accountable. The authorities have not done anything about it. Next slide, please. This is a place called Godhra, and it's the same thing. Churches being gutted and no one being brought to justice, and warnings that this kind of thing could happen just being ignored. If we could go on to the next slide. There are worrying trends in Indonesia as well. Christians, get out. Ben Rogers, one of CSW's staff, was recently on a visit to Indonesia when the church building was invaded by a violent mob that forced them out onto the street with shouts of, Christians, get out! Catch anyone not wearing a hijab and hunt them down. We had a meeting in Rayleigh just recently. This is where Jill and I come from, to express solidarity with our Christian brothers worldwide. And we went along to the local Methodist church. We were sitting there happily just singing some songs, as you do. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 guys dressed up as policemen came in and said, get out! This is illegal! This meeting's being shut down. Just to give us an idea, a little idea of what it's actually like to be in a country where you can be ejected from your church and beaten up as well. Unfortunately, I think that 1 or 2 of the older members of the congregation thought it was for real, which is a bit distressing, really. But anyway, we held the rest of the service outside. Now, I mean, the meeting we had outside was just a pleasant meeting outside. Nothing like what our brothers and sisters are being subjected to when they're being pushed out of their church buildings. So we've got to see this vicious cycle broken, otherwise things are likely to get worse rather than better. If we don't speak up and do something about it, things will get worse rather than better. Next slide, please. The Reverend Palti Panjaitan, I hope I've got that right, in Indonesia says, if there's no help from the international community, we will be destroyed. I think that's pretty clear, don't you? He's not minced his words there. That's fairly black and white. Who are the international community? Could we be part of that? We're part of the international community. And he's saying to us, as clear as daylight, if there's no help from the international community, if there's no help from the Baptist Church in Rayleigh and Christ Church Billericay, then we will be destroyed. So that's a big challenge, isn't it, to us? What's the solution? If we go on to the next slide, please. CSW has a vision of a virtuous circle to break the vicious circle. And how does this one work? Well, it works this way. Religious hatred is peacefully challenged. Christians and the local churches have to take the lead in speaking positively about others. This is a challenge to us in the UK as well, isn't it? To speak positively of local Muslims, for example, because we can all see them all built up into hate figures, you know, because there have been a few attacks by Muslim extremists. But we have to speak positively and think positively about those who don't believe like we do. I just want to remind you that Jesus said, love your enemies. Why did he say that? Because if they're your enemy, they're behind a wall. But if you love them, who knows? The wall might come down. One of the greatest things in my lifetime was the collapse of the Berlin Wall. The people hacking down the Berlin Wall and creating a united Germany. And that's what we want to see. We want to see the world coming together rather than being torn apart. So religious hatred peacefully challenged. This leads to a culture of mutual respect. It leads to communities challenging religious hatred together. It means disagreements can be expressed peacefully. When I have a disagreement with Jill, I normally express it peacefully, don't I? Yeah. And it leads to peaceful coexistence. We have peaceful coexistence most of the time. Yes, it might be the next slide, or not. No, it's not the next slide. Okay, we'll go back here. CSW is meeting with partners in Pakistan who are meeting hatred with the opposite spirit, encouraging love instead of hatred. CSW is working to ensure that people who were attacked in Joseph Colony don't grow up hating their neighbours. That's so important. Otherwise, the bad things that have gone on inculcate a message of you need to hate them rather than I've got to love them. I want to love them to reshape the world. I don't know what you believe, friends, but I believe that in the end, the power of love is greater than the power of hatred. Do you believe that? The power of love is greater than the power of hatred. Isn't that what Jesus demonstrated on the cross? All the hatred being poured out onto him and him expressing a love that's conquered the world in so many ways. John, in the first chapter of his gospel, says the light shines in the darkness and the darkness can't put it out. So what can you do? If we could go on to the next slide. Thank you. Would you help us to drown out the voices of hatred and violence? We're asking two global leaders, the Archbishop of Canterbury and Pope Francis, to take the lead in this. We have got practical recommendations to give them to enable them to raise the issue with faith leaders and political leaders. It needs the big shots, doesn't it, to voice the concerns about things that are going on. And so we're approaching the Archbishop of Canterbury and Pope Francis to ask them to take the lead in this, and your voice will give them a strong mandate. If they say, well, 3 people wrote to us and said, do something about it, don't think that will go down too well. But if thousands upon thousands upon thousands say, please act now, that's more likely to achieve something. These guys are waving retune postcards, and I was meant to bring retune postcards along this morning, but unfortunately they hadn't got printed off. So apologies for that. But on the end of your row, there is you've got one. One of those. If you could put your name, address, email, phone, etc. On that, that would be a great thing to add your voice to other voices. And the message to the Archbishop of Canterbury and to His Holiness the Pope is, I'm adding my voice to Christian Solidarity Worldwide's Retune campaign, which is calling on Christians at the grassroots and at the highest level of church leadership to lead the challenge against voices of religious hatred towards all religious minorities. I'm grateful for the ways in which you've already brought this attention to this issue, Please would you continue to raise it in your discussions with global leaders and those within your own church structures. Doing this will help to ensure the global church stands together to challenge voices of religious hatred. So if you would add your name to that, that would be really, really helpful. How else can you help? If we go on to the next slide. Yep, you could take a copy of the CSW prayer diary and take that home and use it day by day to pray for people who are under persecution. You could also take a copy of Connect and Encourage. And you can actually connect with people who are in prison. We've done that for people in Iran, haven't we? You can send them messages. And who knows what good that does. You just imagine if you're in prison and a postcard, a nice card comes from somebody abroad, I think you'd be very, very glad of that. A simple message of encouragement can do so much to support people. And CSW does get feedback from people who receive cards and messages. Could you also consider making a regular gift to CSW? We can only plan our long-term advocacy work because of regular, faithful giving, such as our work on North Korea, Iran, Eritrea. On your seat, there is an envelope. You could put cash in it or a check in it. Or if you'd like to support on a longer-term basis, you could fill in the form inside and say, I'd like to make a regular monthly donation or a yearly donation to CSW. Could we look at the next slide? Oh, yeah, the next slide, please. Yeah, so please join us in retuning the voices of religious hatred. I wonder whether you've ever heard of a man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Yeah. Who stood up against Hitler and unfortunately lost his life in the process. But this is what he said, and I saw this in an office at CSW's headquarters, and I thought, I've got to say this. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, faced with the evil, the climactic evil of Nazism, said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. So that really needs thinking about, doesn't it, what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said. I'm going to lead us in a prayer, which is on the next slide. And also a slide after that when we get to it. Would you join me in praying? Father, we pray for those whose freedom to choose their religion or belief is under threat today. We ask for your protection in the often hostile environments they live in. Please shield them from the violent words or acts of those who oppose them. When they are fearful, may they know the comfort and peace of your Holy Spirit. Amen. Just one more thing. I take the Times. This is not a plug for the Times. But on the front page of the Times yesterday is a picture of a lady called Maryam Ibrahim. We were praying about her just a little bit earlier on. And I just wanted to read you one or two things from the Times article. It's amazing. Often when Christians are persecuted, no one notices. No one cares, and it doesn't get reported. This has hit the headlines, and it's gone through the media. And I think that's a trend that needs to continue. David Cameron called on the Sudanese government yesterday to lift the barbaric death sentence given to a woman for marrying a Christian as political leaders condemned her treatment. The Prime Minister vowed to heap further pressure on Khartoum. That's what's needed. Pressure, pressure, pressure. over the plight of Miriam Ibrahim, 27, who gave birth to a baby daughter on Tuesday while shackled in her cell. I can't believe that. I really cannot believe that. His condemnation was echoed by Ed Miliband, Nick Clegg and Tony Blair, who urged the international community to increase pressure on Sudan over the plight of the mother of two. Ms. Ibrahim's treatment has already provoked global outrage, with Hillary Clinton describing her death sentence as abhorrent. Britain's leading politicians spoke out after the Times highlighted her story yesterday, and so we could go on. I think you'll agree with me, we want to see her released, but we don't just want the Sudanese government to say, okay, we'll be merciful this time. We don't want mercy for her. We want justice. We want her to have her proper human rights as described in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Isn't that right, folks? Yeah, we want to see justice and human rights being respected.